I vividly recall the precise moment when the realization hit me like a thunderbolt, an ominous awareness that my life hung in the balance. The tension had been building for weeks, a slow crescendo of unease that finally reached its zenith. It struck me then that unless I took drastic measures to safeguard myself, my very existence was at stake. Never could I have imagined that my lifespan would be limited to a mere 18 years. There was an abundance of dreams and aspirations left unfulfilled in my heart. I had scarcely experienced the thrill of a first kiss, let alone embarked on the journey of higher education. It was a nightmare unfolding before me, one that I couldn't fathom. My life hadn't exactly been carefree either. For starters, I had never had the chance to meet my mother. She had passed away while giving birth to me, and I often felt like a constant reminder to my father of the tragedy that had befallen our family. In my mind, I carried the weight of being the reason my mother had perished. I understood that such tragedies were not uncommon, but I couldn't escape the overwhelming sense of guilt and responsibility that consumed me. As my 18th birthday loomed on the horizon, I resolved to tread lightly. Every birthday celebration was tinged with bittersweetness. While I reveled in the cakes and presents, there was always the somber ritual of visiting my mother's grave, offering her flowers as a poignant tribute. She had sacrificed her life so that I could come into the world. It was an immense burden, one I knew I would carry with me forever. Turning 18 felt like a significant milestone, for it marked the age at which my mother had left this world. She had been young, and her tragic death had cast a long shadow over our lives. I sensed that this particular birthday would be especially challenging for my father, so I chose not to broach the subject. When he asked how I wanted to celebrate, I simply suggested a quiet dinner, sparing him the weight of my unspoken thoughts. Before long, my father's behavior took a decidedly unusual turn. He had always been the quiet, reserved type, but this was an entirely different level of peculiarity. One day, after returning home from school, I was greeted by a startling sight. My dad sitting on my bedroom floor, cradling some of my old teddy bears and shedding tears. It was a sight that left me utterly flabbergasted. While I had seen my father cry on numerous occasions, this instance was unlike any before. His expression was one of profound sadness, and when I approached to inquire about what troubled him, he pulled me down to the floor and enveloped me in a relentless hug. This marked just the beginning of a series of perplexing events. In the ensuing weeks, he became increasingly clingy, refusing to give me any semblance of personal space. It escalated to the point where he wouldn't even allow me to walk to school alone. He insisted on accompanying me, attempting even to hold my hand as we crossed the street. Frustration boiled within me, and I pushed his hand away, exclaiming, "Dad, please. I'm nearly 18. I'm not a child anymore. I can cross the street by myself." He appeared taken aback by my outburst, offered an apology, and withdrew. Amidst the bustling traffic, I could have sworn I heard him mutter something like, "That's the problem. You're almost 18. Drained by the strange turn of events, I retreated to my room, where the stifling heat prompted me to open a window and lay down on my bed. The sound of my father and cousin conversing outside reached my ears, but I paid little attention until a sudden mention of my name roused my curiosity. "Listen, you really have to tell her," my cousin urged. "Chloe turns 18 this week. She has a right to know. I mean, when was the last time a woman in this family made it past 18? It's like a curse, Uncle Ethan." The word curse hung ominously in the air, leaving me bewildered and anxious. What was my cousin talking about? What was I supposed to know? I raced downstairs as swiftly as I could, but my cousin was already in his car, driving away, leaving me with more questions than answers. I called out his name desperately, but he merely waved and disappeared from sight. As I turned back to the house, my father stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of concern and sadness. "Dad, what's happening? Is this why you've been acting so strangely? Am I in danger or something?" I blurted out, my fear and confusion palpable. "Dad, no, don't be foolish," he responded urgently, shaking his head. "Your cousin has seen too many movies. It's purely coincidental that your mother, my sister, and your cousin all passed away at the same age." "But what do you mean, your sister?" My curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed for more information. That's when I learned about my father's sister, who had tragically drowned at the age of 18. I had never even known she existed. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. It was no wonder my father had been so emotional when I reached the age of 18. He had lost both his wife and sister at that very age. It felt surreal, like a plotline from a movie, a haunting family curse. And then it hit me. My cousin had also met a tragic end in a car accident the previous year, and she too had been 18 at the time. That night, sleep eluded me as I delved deeper into this disturbing revelation. The more I contemplated it, the more it seemed to make sense. I couldn't recall any women in our family living past the age of 18. How had I never realized this before? All my anticipation of turning 18 for college now seemed overshadowed by a looming sense of dread. But as I considered the circumstances, I realized there were some precautions I could take. I could avoid swimming, didn't own a car, and had no plans for motherhood. Yet the unsettling truth remained. I could meet an untimely end simply by walking down the street, and that reality cast a long shadow over my future. My 18th birthday arrived a day later, giving me a mere 24 hours to cram in all the things I yearned to do. But the nagging fear persisted. What if I met my end in the process? No, I couldn't take that risk. So I spent the final day of my 17th year curled up in my bed, engrossed in movies. I was so cautious that I even refrained from eating, fearful that I might choke and meet an untimely demise. My father persistently urged me to come downstairs with him, but the dread of potential accidents held me captive. Yet, there was one tradition I knew I couldn't forgo. It was a ritual, etched in our hearts. While Dad watched TV, I would sneak behind him and venture into the backyard to gather some flowers. Tulips were Mom's favorites, and we had them in every conceivable hue. Returning inside, I gently tapped Dad on the shoulder, and when he turned to me, his eyes teary, I knew he thought I had forgotten. "Come on, Dad," I reassured him with a faint smile. "You didn't think I'd forget, did you?" Together, we drove to the cemetery, though it was already shrouded in darkness. To be honest, we left home later than planned, but we held fast to the belief that it was better late than never. We made our way along the path to Mom's resting place, but the inky blackness of the night obstructed our view. In haste, I dashed back to the car to retrieve Dad's flashlight. And then, without warning, the ground beneath me gave way. And if it hadn't been for a nearby headstone I managed to grasp in the nick of time, I would have plummeted nearly 10 feet into a freshly dug grave. Fear seized me, and I began to scream uncontrollably. Dad came running, and as he spotted me standing just inches away from the precipice, a palpable sense of relief washed over him. Thankfully, Dad had already placed the tulips on Mom's grave because I had no desire to linger in that unsettling place for a moment longer than necessary. The drive home was filled with tense silence, and neither of us uttered a word to break it. As we pulled into the driveway, I hastily slammed the car door shut and turned to my father with a trembling voice. "See? It is a curse," I exclaimed, the fright still palpable in my words. I could have lost my life back there. My hands were still shaking as I carefully made my way to my room, a newfound apprehension taking hold. I couldn't afford to die. I was far too young for such a fate. I resolved to lock myself in my room, deeming it the only safe haven left. The world outside seemed fraught with peril, and I couldn't take any chances. After all, I had teetered on the edge of an open grave just hours ago. The curse was no mere superstition, it was all too real. My father eventually ceased his attempts to coax me out of my room, and as summer vacation arrived, I remained resolute in my self-imposed isolation. I saw danger lurking in every corner. A potential encounter with a killer bee or a slip in the shower could spell disaster. But as the weeks wore on, my confinement began to take its toll. I felt my strength waning, and the effects of isolation weighed heavily on me. One day, my friends paid me a visit, armed with a picnic in an attempt to coax me outside. However, I adamantly refused, watching as they spread their meal on my bedroom floor while I sat in bed, eating some leftover soup. Once they had left, I felt a sense of relief. Who knew what kind of dangers they might have unwittingly introduced into my sanctuary? But that night, I was struck by a sudden illness. I woke up drenched in sweat, my skin feeling clammy and feverish. A pressing urgency drove me to rush to the bathroom, but throughout the entire ordeal, one thought haunted me. What if I fall and hurt myself? It was during a particularly miserable bout of vomiting into the toilet that a chilling realization struck me like a lightning bolt. I could actually die from this illness. My condition grew progressively worse, and I eventually found myself sprawled on the bathroom floor, utterly incapacitated. In my weakened state, my father discovered me and immediately rushed me to the hospital, a large bucket in tow as I couldn't stop retching. Throughout the drive, both of us were consumed by panic and anxiety. My father repeatedly apologized, his words laced with doubt, even suggesting that perhaps the curse was real, an assertion that did nothing to alleviate our escalating fears. Upon our arrival at the hospital, I was so feeble that Dad had to practically carry me through the entrance. To compound matters, the doctor on duty turned out to be the same one who had saved my mother's life during her ordeal. This coincidence stirred up a tidal wave of emotions for my father, adding an extra layer of complexity to the night's events. The nurses on duty appeared somewhat perplexed, unsure of which of us was the patient. Dad appeared just as pale and distressed as I did. After a series of tests, the doctor provided some much-needed relief by confirming that I wasn't on the brink of death. Instead, my ailment stemmed from a severe case of food poisoning, likely from the soup I had consumed, as well as a touch of malnutrition due to my prolonged confinement indoors and refusal to eat properly. I couldn't help but blurt out, "So I'm not going to die, Doc? What about the curse?" The doctor responded with a chuckle. "All right, Chloe, you need some rest. And you, sir, are no spring chicken either. You both seem a little delirious, I must say." After a few days of recuperation in the hospital, I was finally ready to return home, relieved that my brush with danger hadn't succumbed to the ominous specter of a family curse. I had emerged from that harrowing experience alive and well. The question loomed in my mind, had I somehow broken the curse? During the drive back home, my father suddenly burst into laughter. "Chloe, you know what's ironic?" he exclaimed. "You may have just cursed yourself. You refused to venture outside, avoided the food your friends prepared, and yet you fell ill. I think it's all in our heads. Let's just leave all this behind us. It's just a series of coincidences, okay? There's no such thing as curses." And you know what? Dad was right. I had been so preoccupied with keeping myself safe that I had inadvertently attracted danger to myself. I tried to convince myself that it was all a matter of perspective, that perhaps I had never been cursed in the first place. After all, I had narrowly escaped death on multiple occasions. Was it mere coincidence? Maybe, or maybe not. Fast forward to today, at the age of 23, and there are moments when I still harbor a lingering fear for my life. However, I've come to understand that it's not a curse, but rather a heightened awareness of life's uncertainties that keeps me cautious. As for the prospect of having children, I've contemplated it deeply. What if there were a sliver of truth to the curse, and my daughter were burdened with it? Especially after witnessing the toll it took on my father. In that regard, I find myself erring on the side of caution, saying, "No, thank you."